Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of the FamVestor podcast. We got a great episode for you. We're talking barefoot running, natural family planning,
natural childbirth, and homeschooling,
as well as some other crunchy parenting ideas that we want to share with all the listeners.
Right. We've been exploring these topics in our own life and found them wholesome. They're not so much mainstream concepts, but some pretty neat ideas and food for thought.
Right, and we think there's just a lot of value in sharing with them, and maybe you don't incorporate it into your own life, but we feel like it's good to have awareness of these subjects and wanted to share them with all of you guys. So, I'm your host, Sunny Burns.
And I am your co-host, Sunmarie Burns.
Right, so we've aired this podcast about a month now, 7 episodes. We've had 655 listens, which is awesome. We're really excited about that. Glad that the show is kind of getting around. People are listening. And thank you for all those reviewers. We had a reviewer come in this morning, Liana Rodriguez. Thank you for your review. And we hope everyone can continue to share the show, get the word out. If you like everything you've been hearing, definitely share it with your friends so that they can get some value from it as well. And with that, let's begin the show.
You're listening to the FamVestor podcast. If you're looking to raise your family with intention, gain financial independence, and live a life of true freedom, you're in the right place. Join us as we explore together how to create thriving families, because strong families are the cornerstone for a world at peace.
Welcome back, everyone. So today we're going to be touching upon a bunch of different topics. We're just going to brush into them, give a brief introduction in this episode. And in future episodes, we plan to have guests who are experts in these various fields to go more in depth on these topics. But for now, we'll just give you a little intro to some of these concepts, some food for thought. So, Sunny, you want to start us off with our first topic, which I believe is near and dear to your heart, barefoot running.
Right, barefoot running. I got into barefoot running after reading the New York Times bestseller Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, and that book was so fascinating to me and really changed my world because it got me to think about, the concept. It talked about, this Mexican tribe of barefoot runners, essentially, and they would run for miles and miles, and not just like marathon distances, but hundreds of miles and like crazy distances, and they were doing it without the support of modern day footwear. And, it just got me to thinking, it really convinced me that, your body was built to, it evolved into this beautiful machine where it was built and designed to run barefoot. And it was built and designed to be strong and capable of so many things that in our modern day that we don't maybe utilize or exercise enough to make use of.
Right. And you turned me on to that book as well. So once you listened to it, you suggested I listen to it, and I gave it a listen. And I think the basic premise of it is that your foot muscles and bones are designed for a certain type of running that lends itself to barefoot running. Right.
It's saying like, when you encase your shoe in this really supportive footwear that you're kind of making into this one slab of meat. And it doesn't get to be utilized properly. Like there's a whole like suspension system in your foot that if you use it properly, then you don't get all this
jogging on the knees.
Yeah, you don't get all this shock directly into your knee. You do a 4-foot strike, you rock to your heel, and that prevents all that irritation, all these running issues that people everywhere are kind of being presented with when they go on these runs on asphalt and these hard materials. They're just, the cushioned shoes are preventing them from feeling the pain of all the shock they're really causing their knees. But once you're barefoot, if you run with bad form, you will feel it immediately, and your body won't let you run with that bad form. But the shoes kind of block that and mask that pain and allow you to run incorrectly. So that was kind of like the premise of the book was, take off your shoes. So I think after reading that book, we went on a 1/4-mile run barefoot, right?
That's right.
And what did you think of that?
My feet were a little tender, definitely after the first time. It's something that you need to grow accustomed to. Your feet need to adjust to it.
But it immediately adjusted your form, right?
Oh, definitely.
Right.
I tend to be a heel runner when I run in shoes. So that's a kind of running that a lot of people do. You're either toe front foot runner.
Front strike, or most people just normally naturally start running on their heels, but that creates so much shock to your knees and eventually causes these long-lasting injuries.
Right, and there's lots of shoes that are designed to counteract the effects of the heel striking. So you get a lot of shoes with, what do you call those? Inserts for your...
Right, shock absorbers.
Shock absorption for the heel impact.
But that same shock still exists. It just travels up. Instead of at your heel now, it travels all the way up to your knee. And your knee is sustaining so much more pressure, your ankle as well. And if you use your foot properly, then you would take away a lot of that shock.
Right. And I found that very interesting because that was my concern when we first started getting into running. You've always been an avid runner. Myself, not so much. And when I started running, family members had concern for me saying, oh, you're going to, in the long run, damage your knees permanently. And I had concern that I'm going to be doing this sport for the sake of bettering my health. But at the same time, catch-22, I'm going to ruin my knees. So I thought, well, what can I do to resolve this issue? And I thought that this barefoot running concept is a very intriguing argument, and that is that if you retrain your body to run properly, and what they consider properly is if you front strike, right, with the pad of your foot.
Front strike, and then, so this is mid each stride, you're striking with the front of your foot, the front pad, and then you're rocking to your heel. And continue to run that way. And they do want your knees slightly bent as well.
Right. And so the idea is that the front pad of your foot serves as a shock absorber naturally and gently eases the strike from your foot to the ground into your heel up into your knee. And therefore your knee sustains a lot less damage through that kind of step.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because Christopher McDougall, the author, kind of goes into like the history of the running shoe and how, as years went on, you started with like Converse and like these tinier cushioned soles. And then as years went on, you got thicker and thicker cushions, and then you got more and more running injuries. And then finally, after the book released, it did start becoming mainstream. People started picking up all this minimalist footwear. You see Nike out there now with like their Nike Freeze and Flywire. So it did become mainstream, and I think a lot of it had to do with this book's release.
Vibram,
five fingers, that was the
shoes.
Biggest rage. Everyone was running in those, including
soles.
Myself. And when I say barefoot running, I just use barefoot running, like completely barefoot, just to baseline my running. And I still do it from occasion to occasion, but I've never done it more than 2 miles or so running barefoot. But every day, or I run at least twice a week now. And like today I ran 4 miles, and I did it in my Minimalist, New Balance Minimalists, they're actually called. But they're minimalist footwear, so like a really tiny thin sole. But yeah, it just helps, with any tiny bits of gravel or if there was glass or anything like that.
Right. It gives your foot a little bit of protection so that you're not injuring yourself on road hazards.
Right.
But you're still receiving the benefit of
you're
a
more
non-invasive
aware.
shoe where you're really feeling your muscle movements and the impact of each step.
Yeah, and you're just aware of what you're running on and how your foot is moving. It's not encased in that, that really cushioned shoe.
And there's no doubt that shoes with cushioning and arch support and heel cushioning are not helpful.
Right.
I know a lot of runners who advocate for that very strongly, and I'm not disputing that. But this is an interesting perspective on the idea of running and on proper form in running. And I think it is beneficial to any runner to consider really honing their form to its best possible version. You could still run with those added cushioned shoes, but it does help to, as you said, baseline
Correct
your
your
stride
form.
so that your form is correct and you're minimizing the damage in the long run that it may have.
Right. And I think at this point, like a lot of runners just require those cushioned shoes, those orthopedics. Maybe they're necessary to them. But I feel like maybe if you're brought up running more naturally, then you could, have strengthened your foot to be great. Like, okay, so when I first started running, I was size 11 foot, size 11 and a half actually. And after barefoot running, my foot actually shrunk. My feet became more toned, my muscles got built, and I went from an 11 and a half shoe to now fitting in size 10 shoes. So I dropped a whole foot and size and a half in my shoe size after barefoot running. And, that just was a very obvious indicator of my, foot being used instead of just being a flabby piece of meat. It
became toned,
and the muscles got activated and are in use now.
Yeah, so it's not for everyone, and it isn't necessarily for super long distances. Use it at your own discretion, but the idea of building your foot muscles rather than over padding them is a very interesting concept.
Right.
So we wanted to share about that little tidbit.
So Born to Run kind of introduced me to this concept of bricolage, which is the concept that less is more. The best solution is the most elegant. Why add something if you're born with everything you need? And also talked about, when you support an area, it gets weaker. It doesn't have to be as strong anymore. So if you use it extensively, it will get stronger. So if you run barefoot, your foot will get stronger and you won't have those injuries. There's also one quote that I just want to share before we move on to our next topic. But it was, humans have a mind-body conflict, a body built for performance, but a brain that's always conserving. The brain is always trying to conserve your energy. We live in a culture that sees extreme exercise as crazy. Why fire up the machine if you don't have to? Sitting around was a luxury. Only recently have we come up with a technology to make lazing around a way of life. We've taken our hunter-gatherer body and dropped it into an alien world. And I think that's really what was so transformative for me, was thinking, we have millions of years of history as humans before all the modern industrial revolution and all these new technologies that have come around. And it got me to thinking, we use toothpaste, but when did we start having toothbrushes? We use diapers for babies, but when did we ever get diapers? And all these things that, are just a normal way of our American life that we just take for granted as the way and the only way, when really, we've had to live these lives before maybe these hormonal birth control pills or all these things. And how did we do it before these things existed? And was it a better way, perhaps? Was the original natural way better? So it got me to thinking of all those things, and I think that's why I want to start with barefoot running as a segue into all these crunchy parenting ideas we've discovered along the way. So with that aside, let's touch into natural family planning.
So natural family planning is a natural and holistic method that couples use to avoid or achieve pregnancy. We were introduced and started our courtship 9 years ago now, right? 9 years ago. 8 years ago, we got engaged. And in looking forward to getting married, we made the decision early on that we wanted to abstain until marriage to set the best foundation for our family future. And we adhere to some very traditional values. So that was very important to both of us in starting our life together.
So a little background family history from my side to kind of just get where we're coming from. So my dad was actually abandoned at the age of 8 years old. He kind of grew up in a broken family, and his mother, when he was 8, abandoned him. Luckily, he was adopted a little while later. But because of that, I kind of grew up with a very strong sense from my dad of, family values and how important family is and responsibility really is. So, he told me growing up, having a baby can either be, the best thing that ever happens to you or one of the worst things that ever happens to you. And if you plan it right, if you have intention and you design your life right, make sure it's the best thing in your life. So that's kind of where I was approaching our marriage together and where I was coming from. And so when we, were thinking about our wedding day and marriage, and we decided both together collectively that we want to abstain until our wedding day. But, as our wedding day came closer, I started to look for options. I'd heard about, my dad had said something about rhythm method as like an old thing that Catholics used to practice to abstain from pregnancy or prevent pregnancy. So I started researching that, and I discovered that there's, more modern techniques with higher efficacy rates like natural family planning.
For me, on my my half of the story there. I was very uncomfortable with the idea of some of the modern day contraceptive options available out there. I really didn't want to do something hormonal, chemical based. I didn't want to be putting anything in my body that might down the line have health effects on me. So I felt that was really important that I didn't want to use those options, which were the typical ones most of my peers and friends use, and I just wasn't really comfortable with it. So I was all for this idea of exploring something more holistic, and something that wouldn't require me to have to go with chemicals and other things.
Right. So when I found natural family planning and I brought up the idea to you, you were all for it. And same here, you know, I was not into the whole idea of changing your body's design so you'd be unable to get pregnant. It just did not seem like a good formula to be messing with something as pivotal as that. But anyway, that's just our story. And, you know, I discovered just from a Google search what natural family planning was. And I found this particular method, symptothermal method, which provides 3 checks and has a really high efficacy rate. We met with a great teacher who was teaching a course in our local area. I think it was like 6 weeks, once a night. And she taught us all about natural family planning, how to, you know, use the three different types of checks. Use temperature,
mucus,
and
sensation.
And using those 3 determinations, you can determine whether
the female is fertile or not in her cycle.
Right. So men are always fertile. Women are fertile only sometimes in their cycles.
Right. And one interesting side effect of delving into this topic and taking a course in natural family planning, the symptothermal method, was that we really gained an awareness of how the human body works, particularly the female human body, which for me was very interesting being a woman, learning how my body actually works. Things that you never learn in school. You're not taught by your family necessarily. There's really a lot of ignorance around how your body naturally performs its functions.
Yeah,
so it was kind of mind-blowing. Taking these classes, things that I had experienced my whole life and thought, oh, maybe there's something wrong or whatever.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh, no, this is a natural part of your cycle and whatnot.
It was funny. I feel like every single night after a class, had some aha moment like, so that's why that happened to me. And it was just kind of funny to see that progression as we took those classes, you learning more and more. And me too, you know, me learning so much that I'd never known, and such amazing knowledge, actually, that I was so grateful to.
I think it also builds respect. Both for the man towards the miraculous nature of the female body, and also for a woman towards the respect that her husband's giving, and also just to learn about yourself. You know, regardless of whether you want to follow NFP or not, I definitely think it is great to educate yourself on it just for your own health knowledge.
Exactly.
I learned a lot.
And especially like when you're thinking about getting pregnant, you know exactly, you know, when to have intercourse to create life.
Right. And through the method that we use, you use a charting system. So you're checking these 3 checks.
Biological indicators.
You're checking them daily. The main one is your temperature, because your temperature rises or decreases depending on whether you are fertile or not. Mm-hmm. And the whole course gets into the details so you know which is which. But as you chart every single day, you know, you start to see records, you start to see patterns, and you can see whether you have an inconsistent pattern or a very consistent pattern. You can see when you're fertile, when you're not. You can see if you're having unusual health factors that might be playing with your fertility. And for some women who find achieving pregnancy difficult, sometimes this method can actually help them pinpoint exactly what's going on with their body. Maybe they're having hormonal imbalances or other health-related issues.
And just to be clear, with natural family planning, you are not ingesting anything, you're not taking anything. The only thing you're putting in yourself is maybe a thermometer in your mouth in the mornings.
Your temperature.
Right. So it's completely natural, and it's just science-based. And, you know, it's the efficacy rate, if done right, and it is challenging, it takes a lot of discipline, if done right, is as effective as the modern hormonal birth control pill.
Right. Of course, a lot of it depends on personal discipline. There is
Right.
a required abstinence period
Up to like 12 days every single month.
per month if you are trying to avoid pregnancy.
Right.
And if you're trying to achieve pregnancy, it does directly tell you which, five or days are your optimal days for conceiving.
Right.
So it was very enlightening and something that we're really glad we stumbled upon. It's been working for us in our lifestyle. We were able to fully plan out our 2 years post-marriage. After we got married, we enjoyed 2 years of
Just building our relationship as a couple.
Enjoying traveling and just being a couple. And then 2 years later, we felt it was the right time to consider having our first child. So right in line with that, we had all our charts in line. It was very easy for us to figure out, when to have our baby. And it was right on track. Actually, my due date was more accurate than the doctor's prediction because I had such good record keeping. I knew exactly the day of conception.
And I think it was on the day we had it exactly.
On the day. According to the doctor's calendar, it was a day late.
Right.
But to my calendar, it was on the day.
And and that was really cool, to know more than the doctor based on our strict records.
Yeah, and not that we know more than medical profession, but it was actually very empowering in a way to just take control of your life very naturally, just by tuning into your body and really understanding the majesty of it. There is something to be said to it, and there really isn't a lot of knowledge about it.
Right. It's because I really feel like there's no knowledge because there's no money in it. The pharmaceutical industry with the pill is making billions and billions of dollars. No one's going to make any money off NFP. Of course, Jill Cherry was our instructor at a Westfield, New Jersey, and she charges just the amount for books, and that's it. And so she makes no money off it, and there's like almost no way to make money off it. So without money, there's no marketing, there's no publicity. And it definitely does require discipline. It is challenging. But what I loved most, and I think what we both loved most, is it really opened the doors for communication about a subject that kind of can be maybe taboo in some relationships, and for us, from day one, once we started taking the courses, we were talking about all these different types of things. It made an open subject, an open book for us to communicate, hey, is this the right night, to come together, or is it not? And it was just...
It fostered communication and respect for one another,
right.
Mutual respect, where neither of us felt like we were being pushed or encouraged or pressured in any way. It was we both
decision we
understood
would make
the
together.
Playing field and made decisions together. And that was really nice. I feel like it's strengthened our relationship just as people, that we can understand each other better.
And our instructor encouraged, and I think natural family planning always encourages, to make it a team effort. So Sunray would take her temperature, and then I would take the thermometer, and I'd write down on the chart what that temperature was, as much as possible. Some days you have to do it yourself.
And that way you're
a part of it, a part of the decision.
You know what's going on,
right.
And I think if anyone is considering looking into this as a possible alternative to modern day contraception options, it is strongly advised, and I also advise taking a course.
Right. Highly recommend taking
because if you just try to learn on your own and use the apps and whatever, it's you don't know how effective they are, what their efficacy rates are. You might make a mistake. You might misinterpret something. When you take a course, you're working with trained professionals who know how to read the data and can double check your charts for you to make sure you're not making an error that might lead to a baby when you weren't expecting a baby,
right.
So if you go about it in that very structured way, it's quite effective, and we've been very happy with it in our life.
Yes. Yeah, so I think we've touched on natural family planning enough. Now to move on to natural birthing.
Natural childbirth.
Right, so it's kind of a natural progression, we started looking into all these alternative natural or holistic solutions to different issues, and
I guess you can see we have a trend here. We're very holistic. Mm-hmm. It's just what we like, it's what we prefer, and nothing against anything that does use the modern conveniences of modern day medicine. It's there for a reason, and it benefits a lot of people. For us, though, we were really interested in exploring, exactly what we are designed to be able to do.
Right.
So that led us, as you said, to natural childbirthing. So natural childbirth, as the name implies, is childbirth without painkillers, basically. And to some, that might be like, oh my gosh, that's the most ridiculous idea ever. Why would anyone do that in today's modern conveniences where you have an epidural? And I will say, when I was pregnant with my first son, that is totally the way I thought. Of course I'm going to go and get an epidural. Why would I put myself through unspeakable pain? Because, everything I'd seen in movies and I've heard other women's stories was, oh my gosh, it's the most painful thing you're ever going to go through in your life, So I thought to myself, yeah, epidural, absolutely. But then we watched a documentary called The Business of Being Born. And it really got my mind thinking or rethinking whether I actually wanted to go the epidural route. So in the documentary, The Business of Being Born, they share statistics, which you can find online as well, about worldwide C-section rates and the history of C-sections in industrialized countries as well as poor countries. So back in 1990, the C-section rate worldwide was at 6% of births. Fast forward to now, the C-section rate worldwide is 21%. So while today North America's C-section rate is 32%, Japan is only 8%, and Africa is only 5%. So 32% in America is equivalent to 1 in 3 babies. So it's quite mainstream right now to go C-section rate. And there are various reasons why that is. For some, it is for convenience. A lot of women choose now to do C-sections as a choice for convenience, to have a birth on a certain day or what have you. But there's also a lot of C-sections that happen as emergency C-sections or unplanned C-sections where women go into the hospitals expecting to birth naturally and then end up being rushed into C-section. So I was petrified of the idea of a C-section, mainly because of the recovery time that comes from it. I really didn't want to have to go through a C-section. I didn't want to experience that. I'd also heard that with C-sections, sometimes it limits the amount of children you can have because obviously the amount of cuts you can have to your abdomen. So I was like, well, I don't like that idea. So according to the documentary, The Business of Being Born, when you receive an epidural, it does exactly what it should do, which is eliminates your pain. It also, though, eliminates your entire sense of when your contractions are coming on. And therefore, you're kind of out of tune with how you're progressing and what's going on with your body. And sometimes the epidural can cause you to stall in your contractions and draw out your labor, making it longer than it could have been. And when your labor stalls, sometimes Pitocin is called for, which is a labor-inducing chemical that's given to you to artificially create and accelerate your contractions. So you have now an epidural in you, so you don't feel anything, so that's nice and comfy. But you also have Pitocin acting artificially with a chemical base, creating artificial contractions. And this is going to go on for some time. It may or may not help you dilate and progress. And if carried on too long, it may cause distress to the baby. And if the doctors sense in any way that the baby is distressed, they're going to call for a C-section for the safety of the baby for sure, and as they should. But the idea that the epidural and the Pitocin could mess with your natural labor really got me thinking that, gee, as much as I love the luxury of having no pain in this experience, I don't really want to risk causing undue stress to my baby or having a stalled labor because I can't feel my contractions and therefore don't know how to breathe through the motions. So that's where we started looking into natural childbirthing. So something mentioned in the documentary as to why Japan and Africa may have such lower C-section rates than North America is that the epidural is actually not readily available in those countries. It's not readily available or given freely. And oftentimes, if a woman requests it, if they have it on hand, they are charged for it significantly, and it's not covered by insurance. So a lot of women in those nations opt to birth naturally because it's just culturally how it is done there, and it's a lot less expensive. Whereas here in North America, it's just common procedure. So it's kind of interesting, the correlation of the higher C-section rates and the availability of epidurals. I know I have a friend who was living in Japan and found it really hard to find a hospital that would even consider offering her an epidural because it just isn't something commonly given. So in that thought, we looked for other natural alternatives. And that brought us to some childbirthing classes. There are a bunch of different natural childbirthing methods and schools of thought. There's Lamaze, there's hypnobirthing, Marie Mongan method. There's a whole lot of different things. But the basic premise of it is that your body is naturally designed to give birth. It is any other creature on Earth does it without painkillers. Humans are really no different. We are designed to be able to do this. So I think that fear is a big contributor to stress. And when you're fearful of the stress of the pain that's going to come with childbirthing, you naturally tense up. And that's something we learned in our childbirthing classes, that when you tense up, it causes the contractions to become a lot more painful than they need to be. So the idea of the Marie Mongan method, which is what we studied and what I used in childbirth, is that your contractions are like waves. They start out gentle, they get more intense, and then they level out into a gentle phase at the very end. And each contraction is like that. So it's not like a sudden pang that comes on you unexpectedly, and labor's not like falling off a tree and breaking your arm and having excruciating pain. It's a manageable pain that you just kind of gently glide through as you would sitting on a boat rocking in the water. You know, you feel your contraction coming on, you prepare your mind for it, you breathe through it, you stay calm, and as soon as it comes on, it will conclude. So the methods that are often followed for natural childbirthing is focused on intentionality, focusing on your thoughts to keep yourself as stress-free as possible, working on your breathing to breathe yourself through those more intense moments of contraction, and just believing in your innate ability to do this naturally. So upon making my decision that I wanted to attempt childbirthing naturally without the assistance of an epidural, I had to find a doctor or midwife practice that would welcome my birth plan. Actually, if you're in the North Jersey area, Womb Keepers is the practice that I chose, and they did a phenomenal job. Both of our children, we went through Dr. A at Womb Keepers, and they offer natural childbirthing classes, yoga classes, doula services, everything that you could want to assist you in natural birthing. So basically, when you're thinking to pursue natural birthing, there are two routes you can take. You can go the midwifery route, which is go with a midwife who either does at-home births or in a midwife clinic, or you can go the hospital route with a more holistic doctor. I chose the hospital route because I felt that, I wanted to have the security of hospital setting where there's all sorts of equipment there in case any emergency might come up, that they will be fully ready to handle anything that happens. And I'm really glad I made that decision. With every birth, there's always unexpected things that happen. But I chose the Womb Keepers as my doctor, and we created a holistic natural birth plan. I also hired a doula through the womb keeper's practice. A doula is a birthing coach, basically, a woman who's going to be with you in the hospital, who helps you with comfort measures through your entire labor. And so that was really great for us, especially with my first son, to just have someone there who's seen hundreds and hundreds of births and can reassure me that what's happening to me is completely normal, and to kind of coach me through different comfort measures to make me feel more at ease and more stress-free. So that was really great, and I highly recommend hiring a doula. If you're not going to get a midwife, it's great because it's someone who's there with you from the minute you get into the hospital all the way to when you have birth. Whereas your doctor is going to come more towards the tail end of your labor. So most of your time spent laboring in the hospital is just going to be you and maybe a family member and the nurses. So if you want someone there with more experience, I highly recommend a doula. So we had a doula, and we went with a holistic doctor, and it was really a wonderful experience. I can say that it was not the worst thing that I ever did in my life. It was surely not the most comfortable thing, but it was not anything scarring, so much so that I decided to do it again with my second son, birth naturally. And should we have more children, I plan to do the same thing then as well. One thing I got out of the whole experience was just to learn that you are designed to be able to do this. It is not something that we are incapable of handling and of doing. And it was empowering to just know that our bodies are designed for this. We don't necessarily need medical intervention to help us get through it. Sure, modern day medical interventions do provide a lot of comfort and convenience. They also can provide complications, but they also do take care of unexpected situations. So I'm not going to discredit them at all. I have a lot of respect for hospitals and doctors and what they need to do, and not to say that C-sections are not necessary. They are absolutely necessary in a lot of cases, and I'm really grateful that the option exists. But I was really grateful to be able to try and do this the most natural way possible. I had successful natural births both times, and I didn't need a C-section. But the hospital staff was there supporting me the whole way and allowing me to have really the birth that I really wanted. Another concept along the lines of natural birthing is the idea of bonding with your infant once they're born. There's something called the golden hour, which is this idea that when your child is born, the most important thing before anything else is to just be able to bond with them, skin to skin time, where they can feel the warmth and security of their mother and just be assured in that connection from the minute they're born, because they just went through a really traumatic experience too. Their world just completely changed. They went from a water world into breathing air and feeling cold on their skin, and so that's something interesting, is the golden hour.
Yeah, and it's a special time kind of even before, like even washing the baby, still in the afterbirth, and just putting the baby on the mother's chest and just letting the baby imprint with the mother and calm the baby down with hearing your heartbeat. And our hospital respected that. It was in our birth plan. And
it's definitely something that I think was a good choice to advocate for in our birth plan, because studies have shown that holding off on the first bath for your infant actually allows them to acclimate better to the new air environment. The fluid on the baby actually keeps them warm for a little amount of time while they are bonding with their parent, versus if you wash them right away, it's a very abrupt transition.
So the episode's kind of getting long at this point, so we want to quickly touch on some other crunchy parenting ideas we discovered along the way. So there was this idea of elimination communication, which is pretty much potty training your baby from birth. Not really potty training, but learning their signs. So in the Mongolian culture, they don't use diapers. They just naturally know the baby's cues. The baby makes a cue, and they know, oh, my baby has to go poop, or my baby has to go pee. So they don't use diapers. They just know intuitively, and they learn the cues of their babies so they can do it at will. And so this was a method that we kind of researched. We even listened to a podcast about elimination communication. And we were all gung-ho. We're going to do this. We failed. Honestly, we weren't so in touch with our babies that we knew when it was going to happen. We even thought about, cloth diapering, taking the natural route, the more maybe environmentally friendly route. Instead of using disposable diapers, use cloth diapers that are washable, rinsable, and maybe save money that way either. We failed.
We have several friends who've done it successfully and really advocate for it, and I think it is a great money saver. Diapers do add up after time. Mm-hmm. If you want to wash your child's diaper every single time they go, and especially when they're really young, that's like 10 times a day, it's a great method for you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like you said, too many people gave us diapers at our baby shower that it became way too convenient. So we
never even tried. I don't think we tried once.
I didn't want to wash them. That's what I realized. In theory, I was like, yes, but when reality came, I'm like, no.
Anyway, just for your awareness, the method is out there. We know friends who've done it successfully, so it's definitely not something you shouldn't do, but it just didn't work for us.
It's a personal preference.
Right.
Yeah.
And another crunchy idea?
Baby sign language.
Baby sign language.
Actually, that is something we did do with our first son. We found that he has a innate desire to communicate from the get-go. He was very expressive, and actually as a small baby showed a lot of frustration. He showed a lot of frustration with not being able to communicate or not being understood by us. So we started looking into baby sign language, and it's very interesting because the idea is that you teach your child certain motions for certain things, like for food or for water or for pick me up or...
Right. So like for food, you just, you close your 3 fingers, your forefinger and your thumb, and you put it to your mouth and you tap your lips like 3 times. And that means I'm hungry. And, after when he was 6 months old, I think he started doing that. So before he can verbally communicate, he can't make sounds yet, but he can communicate with signs. And so he would tell us he's hungry. Or what else would he tell us?
All done.
All
when
done.
You're all done
Shaking
with
hands.
food
All done.
Don't want any more.
And it worked marvelously. It was really great and transitioned him great into communicating with words.
Yeah, it's all very simple motions that babies and children can perform, and it's easy for parents to teach. And we did see a marked difference in our child's contentment once he was able to communicate with us and there was less miscommunication happening. He became a much more happy baby. So I really think that is something worth exploring with your child.
Right. And we just rented library books on baby sign language, and I think there was YouTube videos on it too. So a lot of resources out there for that. I think that is actually becoming more of a mainstream idea at this point. So now we are ready for the last subject of our show, because we have already kind of gone a little longer than we had hoped. And what we're going to do is interview the homeschooler. So, homeschooler, when did you start being homeschooled, Sunmarie?
Yeah, at first grade, I began homeschooling.
What about kindergarten? You skipped kindergarten?
No, I guess I did kindergarten. I was home from the get-go. Maybe I started homeschooling once I was born.
Once you were born. Okay, so maybe around 6 years old you started homeschooling formally?
Yeah, 5 or 6, whatever it was. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was homeschooled from K through 12th grade all the way. Never attended public or private school. When I graduated 12th grade, I went on to traditional college. Transition went pretty well for me. No complaints there. But honestly, my takeaway from the whole experience was I really enjoyed the freedom of being homeschooled.
Wait. Before we go into that, how were you able to go to college if you didn't have a high school transcript? And SATs. What about that?
I did take the SATs. I got a high school diploma through distance learning school through high school. So in high school, there was a school in Maine, North Atlantic Regional High School was called, or NARS, and basically it's like a long distance tutorship where you have an assigned certified teacher who reviews your course curriculum for the year. You submit your plan for the year. and they review your assignments and your portfolio, and at the end of the year they deem you whether you covered all the topics necessary to move on to your next grade. You do that for 4 years through high school, and then upon completion of the 4 years, you are awarded a high school diploma.
Right. And you went to college, and you actually got a full ride into college, right?
I did.
Which is pretty awesome. And how'd you do? What'd you graduate with?
Summa cum laude from college. I triple majored. I really did love college, actually, and I found that studying was a strong point for me because homeschooling really sets you up for independent learning and independent,
Independent what?
I lost my train of thought.
Okay, so let's take it back a little bit. So why were you even homeschooled? Why did your parents consider this?
So the town that we grew up in did not have a very good school district. The ratings were really low. I grew up in Newark, and at the time the school system was really subpar. And so my parents were planning to move to a town with a better school, but circumstances didn't allow it at the get-go when school should have started. Private school was not really an option because it was too expensive. And so my mom looked into the idea of homeschooling. And she said, you know what? Let me give it a shot for kindergarten. Let's just write out kindergarten, and then probably next year, right in time for first grade, we'll be living in a different place. Kindergarten came and went. First grade came around. We still hadn't moved or made a decision of where to go. And my mom was kind of getting the hang of this homeschooling idea. She made a lot of connections with a lot of homeschool networks in our areas and found out that actually it's quite a commonplace form of education, and there's lots of people doing it. So we weren't alone in our experience, and she became very confident in thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll do this for a couple more years. Maybe I'll just do it till third grade. You know, and so it kind of was a plan that just sort of unfolded throughout our lives. We went each year saying, you know what, let's just do it for another year, see how it goes, and see if we decide at that time it's the right time to transition.
And how did your mom know to teach you these curriculum? Like, how did she know what kindergarten subjects were?
I mean, there are lots of curriculums out there, and there are lots of catalogs for shopping through various school curriculums. There's many different ways you can go about homeschooling. You can take a very loose method where it's very eclectic and you pick and choose enrichment materials and so forth, or you can go with a traditional style curriculum which has everything right there bound in a book for you and in all your various subjects. That is the route that we chose, a more traditional form of schooling where we had a curriculum. We had our typical language arts, math, sciences, geography, history, etc. But there's also the option where you can even go through your local public school and request to have the public school curriculum and just choose to do instruction at home. Some families did that as well. That's not something we ever opted to do, but it is an option out there for parents who might be nervous about the idea of having to curate their whole child's curriculum on their own.
Right. And it seems like nowadays there's a lot of online curriculums too, with
Correct.
videos and a lot more multimedia to kind of create a better experience or homeschooling.
Right. And there are online schools actually that you can go through from first grade, maybe even kindergarten, straight through 12th grade, which you can do online, or you can do as an extension program with workbooks at home that you input your data online and teachers are reviewing it and making sure that you're covering all the necessary topics for your grade level and certifying you at the end of each year as having successfully completed that grade. So some people do that as well from the get-go. I think there's a curriculum called Switched On Schoolhouse that kind of works like that. Christian Liberty Press has one that you can do from long distance. We did ours just in homeschool through North Atlantic Regional High School for high school. But there's lots of different options out there.
So I think a lot of people, their biggest fear or concern when they hear about homeschooling is just the idea of social awkwardness, you know, just being a child trapped in a room, never socializing. What is your thoughts on that?
Right. So that was always a big peeve of mine growing up because it is a wide-held concept that homeschoolers are socially inept because they are not sitting in a classroom all day long with their peers. And I would argue that homeschooling actually does socialize you in a far more realistic way than the artificial classroom situation does, where you're being isolated with a group of peers strictly only within your own grade level for 8 hours straight every day, without a whole lot of interaction, dealing with differing ages of children, both younger and older than you, dealing with adults, dealing with life situations. Whereas as a homeschooler, you're working with your family, but you're not just in isolation. There are lots of extracurricular activities. There's lots of educational co-ops that you go to. Basically, they're classes outside of the home that you attend. So you're not sitting in one brick structure, one schoolhouse all day long. You're going all around to different places, to different co-ops, to different classes, to different social groups, to different sports teams. And so you are getting your socialization. It's just not in the conventional way of being in the convenience of one schoolhouse.
So how often would you get together with other homeschoolers in these associations?
It varied. Definitely, our main academic core was covered at home on our own in our family in the morning hours. But come after lunchtime, 2 o'clock, we would often go out in the afternoon to reconnect with our co-op groups for enrichment programs. So we would do it depending on the year. Sometimes we did it 4 days a week. Sometimes we did it 3 days a week. But we did it very regularly, where we went out and did literature classes, science classes in the older grades, chemistry and biology labs, drama classes, choir work, musical instruments, sports teams, Toastmasters and debate. Lots of different topics where we were with other children our age and varying ages in a diverse setting.
Okay, sounds good. So why do we want to homeschool our kids?
So definitely something we thought about. From my background, once I graduated homeschooling, I went to college and I became a certified elementary teacher. And then following that 3 years after graduating, I went and taught for 3 years in the public school system. So I was curious to see how that would impact my opinion of homeschooling once I was receiving a more in-depth understanding of the public school experience. And no fault of the public school system, but I do feel that the traditional school model does not lend itself to individualized learning. As much as we are trying to differentiate learning today and cater to each child's individual needs, it's virtually impossible when you have a classroom with 32 students and 1 teacher, or whatever the ratio may be. You try your best as a teacher, you really do go above and beyond, and teachers do that. I know that for a fact. But there's just so much red tape, and there's just a lot holding back the ability to really cater education to each child's needs. So for me, in observing this, I felt, having experienced a very different way of being educated, where my education was completely catered to my individual needs. It was completely tuned to my interests. When I was interested in a topic, I delved into it. I could spend as much time as I wanted on it. If I struggled with something, we could spend weeks on it. If I excelled at something and it was a breeze, I could just breeze through it and move on. I didn't have to stay on it for a set amount of time because that's what it was scheduled for in the curriculum. So in seeing all of that, I thought that I still preferred the homeschool method to the public method for just the ability to really explore academics from a much more enriched place, where the learning is really inspired and really catered to the individual studying it.
So you've been home now with the kids for, Vaylen's now 4 years old. So for the last 4 years, you were on maternity leave, and then you decided not to go back to school as a teacher. You just decided to retire at that point, stay home with the kids. And, you could start up again when Vaylen turns 5. He could go to kindergarten. You could be in the same exact school teaching and him go to school. Why do you don't want that break per se? Like sometimes I feel like, after a weekend with the kids, it's a Monday morning and I'm like, it's a break, time for a break, go to work. I go to work, and it's a break from the kids, and, I get to regenerate my batteries, reset. But for you, it's 24/7. You're day in taking care of the 2-year-old, 4-year-old. What do you think? You don't want that break?
Well, I mean, definitely from a personal perspective, the idea of having a break sounds absolutely lovely. But I do feel that my most important calling in my life is just raising my children and helping them become responsible, good people and citizens. And so I feel like that's really my duty. And I don't want to put that responsibility on anyone else, really. And I really enjoy spending the little moments with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Just the fact that I haven't had to miss their little milestones in these 4 years already. I'm extremely grateful that I could be there for their first words, for their first steps, for, when they start trying out expressions and making jokes and copying one another. It's really precious, and it's a time that I can never get back. So I'm grateful that I've been able to experience it thus far, and I feel there's so much more of that, and I really want to be a part of that throughout their lives. Just experience their childhood with them and really help them have the best childhood I can provide. And I think that homeschooling is a wonderful way to do that. If I were to put them in school, I would be stepping back from a lot of that, and a lot of what they learn and experience would be outside of my experience with them. And it's something that if they chose to share with me, I would know about, but if they didn't, I wouldn't. And I just really want to be a part of their lives and to build that rich family connection that I think homeschooling lends itself to.
Right. Right, and I don't know, you shared a lot of experiences like growing up, how your family was always like traveling places, going on road trips, and how you could do it, off school season. So you'd be like traveling when no one else was out, and you could do a lot of things that were kind of cool, just from a homeschool perspective that no one else really had the ability to do.
Right. I feel like there is, as I said before, a lot of freedom that comes with homeschooling, freedom to cater your schedule however you like, study whatever you feel inspired to study at a particular time, and just explore the topics you want to explore. And I think you, as a home educated student, don't get burned out as easily either, because you're not being forced to study things that seem irrelevant to you and that have no bearing on your life. If homeschooling's done right, everything you're studying is something that you're passionate about in that moment, you want to know about. It's that natural desire to learn that is innate in all of us from a young age, but unfortunately gets kicked out of us through school a lot of times because we just feel we're doing busy work or just studying things that we don't understand how it relates to our future life, and it seems irrelevant to us, and we just get bored, and then we're like, ugh, why do I have to do this?
Right.
I can say I was never bored of my school experience. I really wasn't. And most of my peers were. And I was unpopular in that way because they liked to hate school and I liked to love school. So that made me a little different.
Right. I can definitely share that sentiment of hating school, looking at the clock. I remember I was so bored sometimes, I would just hold my breath for as long as I could, watching the clock. And that was my game. And I would have these mind games that I would play out in my head, just not listen to the teacher, just because I was bored.
Yeah.
But I'm sure many people can share that experience. I'm pretty excited about the whole homeschooling idea. I want to teach my kids a lot of different things that are taught in schools, a lot of values that I really appreciate, that we both appreciate. And I love the idea, like if I get, I have this opportunity to perhaps work a year in Japan. And, even if Valen is school age, we can take the whole family and, experience this new culture for an entire year working overseas.
Cultural immersion.
Right. or just travel places, and for extended periods of time with the kids, let them experience the world firsthand and learn, go to museums and learn from the experts and get a hands-on feel of everything and exploring. So I don't know, throughout the years, I was regular public school education, but growing with Sunri, I've kind of grown onto this idea of homeschooling, and I'm now fully supported, and I'm excited by the idea. So with that, I think we've been talking for long enough. Lots of ideas out there. Just touching on a lot of these topics, and we will bring you experts on a lot of these fields. So definitely stay tuned for future episodes when we start bringing on guests, which will come shortly. Maybe next episode, maybe not. We'll see. So with that, we thank you for listening, and wish you all the best of luck and Godspeed. Bye.